Hi, welcome back to another episode. I am with Kristen today. She is a licensed therapist who specializes in anxiety, um, perfectionism, and trauma. She is also a published author and a TEDx speaker. So she's going to share some of her insights, and we have her for a few minutes to pick her brain. So, with that said, let's go ahead and dive right in. Can you give us your intro if you don't mind?
Sure. So I'm Kristen, as Jackie said, therapist specializing in anxiety, perfectionism, and unresolved trauma. Um, Published my first self help book the end of last year. It's called Unpacked: How to Detach from the Subconscious Beliefs That Are Sabotaging Your Life. Also, a TEDx speaker and do some other professional speaking in addition to some coaching and consulting on the side.
Hey, and so this episode, again, we're talking about people pleasing, anxiety, and boundaries. So this is sort of a follow up, actually, of the Valentine series that I did. I took the top tips that a lot of the entrepreneurs and small business owners were bringing up, and we're just going to kind of dive into each pillar. So there were six things that kept coming up throughout all of these conversations with various women. None of you knew each other. I guess you could say it ended up being some sort of like case study, if you will. And one of the things that kept coming up was boundaries. So I figured let's dive into that. So when you hear the word, um, or when we hear the word boundaries, many people aren't exactly sure what that means. From a therapist's perspective, what are healthy boundaries?
I feel like boundaries has become sort of a buzzword lately. You'll hear it thrown around a lot, in pop psychology on Instagram and stuff.
Mm,
Boundaries are they're extremely important. We can't really function in a sustainable way without them, and I really think of them as sort of a protection of time and energy. So in terms of time, that's setting boundaries around how we're spending our time, what we commit to, saying no to things. And in terms of energy levels, that's setting boundaries within relationships. So some relationships tend to drain our energy. Some relationships tend to replenish it or sort of restore our energy. So when it comes to boundaries, those are kind of the ways I think about it.
okay. Why do you think so many adults struggle with boundaries?
I think we're just kind of in a very busy and hectic society, and there's a lot going on. People are just sort of overcommitted these days and trying to do it all. And I think a lot of times in terms of relationships, we feel like there will be a cost to the relationship or we'll lose that relationship if we try to set healthy boundaries. And in a way, there's some truth to that in the sense that when we first set boundaries with someone, there is often some pushback and it might feel a little bit disruptive because we're changing the dynamic. We're changing the way we relate to that person. But ultimately, once you cut through that period, it actually makes the relationship much stronger and much healthier. That's the one I think people struggle with the most because there's just this fear of loss or disconnection there. So we don't want to jump in with like these major boundaries right from the get go, but just kind of incrementally setting smaller boundaries and sort of working up to those things is important.
Mm. I think something that was coming up again through conversation was it seemed like people pleasing and boundaries kind of go hand in hand, or the
Hmm.
lack thereof, I guess I should say.
Hmm.
As far as people pleasing goes, do you think that these patterns usually start from childhood or they stem from childhood? Something maybe that
Typically,
happened in childhood.
yeah, typically people pleasing is sort of, prioritizing other people's needs above our own and really neglecting our needs, which is
Hmm.
essentially what happens when we don't set boundaries, right? We're not respecting our time, we're not respecting our energy. And so oftentimes growing up we become people pleasers if things felt a little bit chaotic or tense, or if we felt like maybe a parent's emotional reactivity was unpredictable. Then it was sort of we sort of go into what's called a fawning response, where it's people pleasing. We're sort of like, okay, what do I need to do in order to stabilize this situation and my environment and my relationships? And so we'll pretty much do anything we need to do for that other person or for those other people in order to do that so that we feel a sense of safety.
And so what I'm kind of hearing is if that's not healed, you kind of then bring that into every other relationship.
Mhm.
as an adult, your work relationships, your friendships,
Mhm.
relationships that, um, acquaintances, I should say. Would you agree? Is that
Yeah, it kind of becomes your operating system. So it's
mm,
something that then it's not even like you necessarily do it consciously. It's just sort of subconsciously how you move through the world and how you interact with other people. It kind of becomes second nature, so to speak.
right?
But it started as sort of a protective adaptation.
Mm. Do you maybe if you can share, I don't know, an example or just kind of something for us to note? How does childhood trauma sometimes show up in adulthood? Again, on this note, when we're talking about relationships and boundaries, like you said, sometimes you don't even realize that you're doing it, right?
Yeah, so I think most commonly it's typically somebody who's had a parent who's pretty emotionally immature, so they don't have a good handle on their own emotional regulation or they're not very insightful or self-aware. And so, this could be anger outbursts, for example. So, or a lot of like volatility. So, if somebody grew up with, let's say, a dad who would come home from work and was just stressed and patience has worn thin and the kids are being crazy and running around and he, has an anger outburst and lashes out. A lot of times kids will go into this fawning or people pleasing mode just to sort of get that sense of safety and stability back in the family unit. So they might go up to dad and try to make him laugh or bring him something, bring him a drink or a snack or something
Mm,
to try to help regulate his emotions for him. And so then that we bring that into our adult relationships too. And so these people will often find themselves in a relationship with a partner who's very similar to that parent, where maybe there's some emotional volatility or they are very selfish and kind of prioritize their needs and don't really consider the other person's needs. And so this person will sort of carry that operating system into these relationship dynamics in adulthood as well.
yeah, I've heard that a lot. Is there some truth to that in your opinion where people will kind of end up like, or not end up, they will end up with someone that's like one of their parents?
Yeah.
I hear that all the time. Like you marry someone that's like your mom or marry someone that's like your dad. What is that?
Yeah. So again, that's our subconscious at work. So a lot of times we'll choose a partner that is similar in ways, not necessarily, sometimes it's personality, but it doesn't have to be. More similar in the sense of like of the familiarity of it and what we feel internally when we're in that relationship dynamic. So oftentimes it mimics the parent with whom we've had more of a strained relationship with because there's a part of us that almost wants like a redo. We want to kind of that parent-child relationship through our adult relationship, but that never ends up well. So this is where you're going to find a lot of like anxious attachment patterns or avoidant attachment patterns. And typically, that makes for either an unhealthy relationship or a relationship that ends at some point.
Yeah. It's like you're going in this cycle,
Yeah.
now as an adult. It's funny you mentioned the attachment patterns because I was watching a podcast and I've just heard of those for the first time.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I would love to dive deep into those one of those days, but I think that is so crucial. Once the way she was explaining it and how, of course, like I don't remember them exactly, but like not the secured one was like the most healthiest, right? What's the other
Yeah.
one? Detached.
I'm sorry.
Is what are they called? Detached, is that one of them?
So there's
Or
secure, anxious, avoidant, and then anxious, avoidant, or disorganized. It's sort of like a combo
okay.
of those two.
So she
Yeah.
was saying how a lot of times the anxious and the avoidant end up together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so you're just like so not fulfilling each other's needs.
Right. It's
So
very much a push pull.
yeah, yeah, that was very interesting to me, and I was like, oh my gosh, it would be great to learn for people listening and myself included, really, to learn the type of attachment that you are, and then if you are in a relationship, what the attachment
Mhm.
style is of your partner, because it really does help you understand why things happen, why they're triggered that way, or why they tick, that way.
Yeah. There's actually there's
Oh,
a
but
quiz you can take online. There's a website called the Attachment Project, and they have a quiz where you can see what your attachment style is. And then there's also a book just called Attached, which is really kind of dives deep into the different attachment styles. And it's not like clinical in nature. It's written for people who aren't in this field, and
mhm,
so it's written in a way that's very digestible.
yeah, yeah. I'm Man, you guys look into that for sure.
Yeah.
One thing I heard recently, and I can't remember where I heard it, and that's annoying me, but basically she said like because a lot of the stems, if not all of it, from our childhood. So she said like that maybe what happened in your childhood is not your responsibility. You weren't the cause of it, but it is your responsibility to heal it.
Yeah.
And that really like stood out to me because I'm like, that is so true. You can only have a sob story for so long before
Hmm.
you realize that just messing your own self up, you know?
Yeah.
You can continue to cry about what happened, but like, what are you doing to actually heal?
Right. Right.
Actually, on that note, what are some signs that stick out to you that maybe someone is struggling with boundaries and they don't even realize it?
Definitely if they feel pretty spread thin and overwhelmed by just kind of everything they have in life. I would say that's kind of what I see the most. A lot of times boundaries come up with parents, like adult children, with parents and kind of figuring out what they're responsible for and what they're not. The adult child I'm talking about right now. Um we sometimes continue to play out those same relationship dynamics that we had growing up where, if I have a client I'm thinking of who had a pretty critical and kind of controlling mother. And so that was continuing to play out in her relationship with her mom in adulthood. And so we really kind of worked on setting boundaries there and, what's her responsibility, what's not, what are certain beliefs that maybe mom passed on to her that aren't true or that aren't working for her anymore, things like that. So I'd say those are kind of where I see them show up the most. And
Okay.
with work, like a lot of people really have a hard time setting boundaries with work. I think especially since the pandemic when everyone's available all the time. So it can be really challenging to kind of
Yeah.
turn that off.
And it's funny because one of the business owners that I interviewed, she struggles with boundaries. And she also said that she was a people pleaser because something from childhood, she mentioned she was the firstborn. So she's got like that
Mhm.
firstborn people pleasing syndrome. So it's just funny how that those two went hand in hand. Like she's not setting the boundaries because she feels like with work because she feels like she needs to respond to everyone.
Mhm.
So it's 9 o'clock at night and she's responding to people on Instagram
Yeah.
because that people pleasing in her is like, "Oh, I don't wanna make them wait to the next day to, have me respond to them. They may think that I'm ignoring them," or, just being conscious of these things is, like, eye-opening, you know?
Yeah. And most of that comes from like a fear of disappointing others. That's something that I think a lot of people struggle with. And it's just a part of life, right? Where you're not gonna make everybody happy if you
Yeah.
try to. You're gonna, burn yourself out pretty quickly.
Yeah. Earlier you mentioned that it can be difficult to kind of implement boundaries, especially with family, because you're changing the dynamic, right? What are some tips on how people can go about bringing this up to family members or maybe sticking to it when you see some pushback
Mhm.
from whoever that is that you're trying to set that boundary with.
Yeah, and I don't think it always needs to be a conversation with the other person. I think a lot of it is just like behavioral. So maybe saying no to something that you don't want to, like a family function or something that you don't want to attend,
Mhm.
but would have otherwise just because you felt obligated, and you can offer an explanation, if and some people do, but sometimes that can actually perpetuate the cycle because then we always feel like we have to have some sort of like external reason that we are saying no to something as opposed
Yeah.
to like, okay, well, I'm saying no to this because I don't want to go or I
Yeah.
am doing something for myself, like have this other or other personal obligations, even if it's just like going grocery shopping, that if you attended this function, you would sort of be sacrificing that time. So, whatever the reason is, just kind of trusting yourself that that's valid, and other people have their own expectations, but you weren't involved in creating the expectations. So why do you need to meet their expectations? That's, I think, one thing a lot of people struggle with is just this sort of need to meet others' expectations, kind of going back to that fear of disappointing them. But it's like, again, if you're meeting everyone else's expectations and worrying about disappointing them, you're ultimately disappointing yourself in the process.
What would you say if, like, everyone's different, but if they're being called out on it, like if they're like, "Hey, I don't see you around anymore. You missed the last couple things.
Hmm.
What's going on?" Like,
Hmm.
is it good then to bring up the conversation, or how would you suggest responding?
Yeah, and I think just focusing on yourself, like, and your needs as opposed to like, well, I didn't attend that because I can't stand to be around so and so, but rather like, yeah, I chose not to attend that because I had a really long week at work and I just needed some time for myself to kind of recharge and recover before the week ahead. So something of that nature, just making it more about your needs versus kind of blaming it on something else.
Right, right. You don't need to have a confrontation.
Yeah.
Let me Okay. So on the people pleasing, again, we've established that someone is doing that. What is one step that they can start to start building healthy boundaries or to kind of get out of that pattern?
I think for starters, it's just creating awareness around it because, like we talked about, a lot of it's so automatic. Like it's just our operating system. And so a lot of times we're not even aware that we're doing it. So I think just creating awareness around, like, a lot of the clients I work with, they'll say yes to something before they even give themselves a chance to think about whether or not they have the capacity or the time or even want to do it, right? It's just like an impulse. So creating space before you respond, saying like, let me think, or let me check my schedule and I'll get back to you or something. Reminding yourself that if you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. That's a really helpful kind of trade-off framework that can be helpful for people. And then just again, like tuning in that awareness piece, identifying when you're sort of inclined to say yes to something when you actually don't want to. And you'll have like a gut reaction. If you tune into your body, your gut will tell you whether or not something feels right. And so really kind of tuning into that and figuring out, all right, what feels right and aligned with what I want to be doing and who I am and how I want to be spending my time, and what feels more like an obligation or that I would be sacrificing something by doing this. So
Yeah.
that could be helpful.
It's really good. I remember speaking to a therapist some years ago, and she said like you can still engage. A tip that she gave one time was like you can still engage with certain people that maybe you've kind of created a boundary without them really even knowing.
Yeah.
Maybe they're like she gave an example of like the gossiping aunt, right? You
Hmm.
got to be careful what you tell her because she goes and like spreads your business everywhere. So she's like you can still see her during the holidays or engage and engage in conversation, like limit what you say, limit the
Yeah.
information. You know what I mean? So I think that was a really good practical tip of how to implement it without it being like you said. You don't need to have this full blown conversation
Yeah.
where you're laying out all the details of this new boundary that you set up with this individual,
Right. Right.
and also knowing that you can still enjoy, I guess, some components of that relationship that maybe you do
Hmm.
enjoy, right? Because obviously you enjoy something about this person. Otherwise, you completely cut them off entirely. I think where it can get difficult is when it's family, though. That's where it's like
Yeah.
great because they're so comfortable to confront you about it. It's not like someone that you could just ignore.
Hmm.
Um, so another thing that kept coming up again while I was doing this interview is addressing anxiety and overworking and depression. I interviewed a bunch of high level people, so I think sometimes entrepreneurs, creatives, it comes with a lot of pressure and a lot of anxiety. So what are some maybe practical tips that people can implement when they're Well, first of all, how can they identify that they're anxious? Because I think that's step number one is to realize that you are struggling with anxiety or you are an anxious person without realizing.
Yeah, I think some warning signs would be if you have a hard time resting or slowing down. A lot of times when we're anxious, we're constantly in that fight or flight mode. And so we're kind of constantly moving, even if it's just internally, right? Like our nervous system, there's always sort of that energy, that fight or flight energy that doesn't allow us to fully relax, even if we're like laying on the couch watching Netflix. We might still be thinking about the million things that we still have to do. So I think that's a big warning sign. If we notice we're just kind of irritable or snapping at people or sort of losing patience, that can be a sign of heightened anxiety. And somatic or physical symptoms. So a lot of times anxiety comes with a lot of GI issues, or people will have heart palpitations or stomach aches or things like that.
Interesting.
Or difficulties.
And
That's another one.
yeah, insomnia. And so, okay, let's say you've identified, maybe you're listening to this and you're like, wow, I didn't even realize my stomach issue was related to anxiousness. What would you say is the next step?
I think reaching out for help, that's what therapists are here for. And I think a lot of those of us with high functioning anxiety, so a lot of the entrepreneurs or, people who are high level in whatever their job is, there's sort of this like, I can handle it, I can power through mentality. And it's like, sure, you probably could, but at what cost? It's not sustainable. Eventually, it's going to catch up with you, whether that's through more heightened anxiety, whether that's through then medical issues, because it can manifest differently. So I think just trying to get ahead of it when you notice that it's starting to impact you, and really kind of finding ways to not just cope with it or manage it or regulate it, but also what I work with clients on is like figuring out where it's actually coming from. What is the root cause of that, and how can we heal that so that the anxiety is, it may never be like 100% gone, and we actually don't want it to be because it's a survival mechanism, but that it's at least at a healthy degree and not affecting you every day.
I love that you said get to the root cause of it because I feel like a lot of people are scared to seek out help or admit because they think that they're gonna just be like, they're gonna put me in like a mental hospital the minute I say what's really on my mind.
Yeah.
Or I'm gonna get a doctor that is just like, here's some pills, see you next week. And
Mhm.
then now that prescription may have caused another set of symptoms or what do you call it? Can't think of the word, but you know what I mean. So I think people are like, forget it. Like, what's the point of
Mhm.
speaking up when it may be worse if I do. I'm managing thus far,
Mhm.
although living life, not at the best capacity, but the alternative to that is bad. So I like that you said get to the root cause of it. But on that note, are you of the belief that medication helps? It doesn't? Is it circumstantial?
Yeah, I think it's circumstantial. I have a lot of thoughts on this, so I'm trying to figure out like where to start. For I guess first off, to dispel some myths that are out there that you kind of just highlighted. Therapists and psychologists are not prescribers. Psychologists, I don't know about other states, but and they're sort of working that way, but they are more of the talk therapy people that you seek out. Psychiatrists are the prescribers. So they actually don't do a lot. Most don't do a lot of talk therapy. They really just they're prescribing medication, like that's their role. So really you kind of need both if you're going to go the medication route. I would say start with a therapist and see if you can get this stuff under control without medication. And then if you're still running into problems, then it's probably chemical. It's probably your neurotransmitters, your serotonin and whatnot that need that little boost of medication to just kind of balance out a little bit more. So again, it's very personal. And I know a lot of people are scared of the side effects of medication, or they react really strongly to medications and don't tolerate them well. I've had clients like that, and so there is some hesitation. So I don't think there's a right or a wrong. I think it's just a completely personal preference and it's there as a resource and it helps some people and it doesn't help others.
Yeah, yeah. That's good. I have a lot of thoughts on that too. So I was all these things were crossing my mind. And when you said some people react to medication, I react that way to just like regular medication.
Yeah.
I'm very sensitive that I'll get headaches or vision. So, and then I've heard like horror stories with psych meds. So that's
Mhm.
good. Start with talking through and seeing if you can, because you can feel like a lot for most people, they can solve it that way first in most
Yeah.
cases.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's good. All right, let's see. Let me get some water. My mouth is so dry.
And just to add to the comment about, thinking they're gonna be put into like a mental institution or whatnot, that's only the case if someone is a risk of harm to themselves or others. So, like, people can get very concerned about that happening and sort of like losing their freedom or, you know, losing that autonomy. But it's really that is only meant to keep people safe and stabilize them. So like if you unless you went to a therapist and you're like, yes, I actively want to myself, then that is not going to be a course of action otherwise.
Right, right. Yeah. That makes sense. You just hear those horror stories where people are like, I just went in to, I said I was depressed and now all of a sudden I'm being told I can't leave.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my God, is it really like that?
Yeah.
I want to talk a little more about the anxiety because I think that's the biggest thing that people struggle with. So, okay, what if some people don't have insurance or they can't afford to see a therapist. They're struggling with anxiety. Maybe they're struggling with anxiety and panic attacks and panic disorders. What would you say to that individual to just kind of at least stabilize things until maybe they do have the means or the resources to speak to a professional?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of resources out there for people who might not be able to afford traditional talk therapy. There are, support groups are a great resource, and you have to be kind of discrepant in terms of what content you consume. But there is a lot of great stuff out there, like on YouTube and stuff, of different meditations or vagus nerve exercises are really good for regulating the nervous system. So any sort of like mindfulness, meditation, vagus nerve stimulation, those are all going to be really helpful for regulating your that fight or flight response. So, and then they have there are apps out there like Headspace and Calm, and those have some good meditations, especially for people who are kind of beginners. And then I also like the app, the tapping solution. It uses something called the emotional freedom technique. So you tap on different parts of your body and like kind of while you're doing a meditation, and that can also help to just kind of regulate that anxiety.
Okay, I've never heard of that one. And what about panic? So I'm actively having a panic.
Yeah, again, like the vagus nerve exercises are probably going to be best there. Sometimes with a panic attack, it depends on how far into it you are. Sometimes you just have to ride it out. Like once you're in it, you might not be able to like fully get out of it by using these techniques, but just reminding yourself like I'm safe, this is temporary, I'm okay, making sure somebody's with you to support you. With panic, it can be helpful to put an ice pack like on your chest or the back of your neck or your face, like grounding exercise, anything sensory. So like biting into a lemon or splashing ice water on your face, walking outside in the cold air, even grounding techniques. Like a lot of times I'll have clients just feel their feet firmly planted on the floor and kind of imagine tree roots growing out of the bottoms of their soles into the earth. What that does is it brings you back to the present moment. So a lot of times with anxiety and panic, we're not here, right? We're like either here or we're we're gone, right? We're sort of disassociated. And so it brings us back to the present moment where we can feel safe again.
What would you say to people? I feel like it's lifted a little bit. It's not as common, but there's still sort of a negative connotation to like having to see a therapist or admitting that you struggle with some of these issues. What would you say to that?
I think everyone walking the face of this earth should see a therapist. Like, people think that you have to have some sort of severe mental illness, and that's just absolutely not the case. Most of my clients are very high functioning, very successful people I'd probably be like friends with, if they weren't my clients. And so I think it's just to normalize it that like there's room for growth for everyone and throughout our entire lives, right? We never sort of hit a finish line where we're like, okay, I'm good, I'm done. At least I hope not. People who want to continue learning about themselves and becoming the best versions of themselves and just kind of leading the best lives that they can. Like, there's no harm in having somebody assist you with that if you don't have all the tools or resources to do that on your own.
You kind of answered what I was going to ask you next, but so you would recommend, or I guess we'll say it this way. How often do you recommend someone check in if they're like, "Well, I don't really feel like I'm struggling with anything."
Mhm.
How often should that person be speaking to a therapist to maybe help prevent in case or when things? I feel like there's always going to be a something when something happens.
Yeah, that's usually what brings somebody in, right? Is like
Mhm.
when there's a crisis or, something that feels beyond the scope of what they can cope with at the
Yeah,
moment. I mean, I think a it can be helpful to have that space to vent, like you said, to someone that is just completely objective and non-judgmental and can see things can see the blind spots that maybe you can't see. Most of us have friends and family that are supportive that we can talk to, but they're not going to see things through the same lens as a therapist would because they have some sort of emotional attachment to you. Whereas a therapist can really be more objective and kind of look for patterns in terms of how things are happening or how you're living your life and then really kind of pull in those blind spots and maybe identify some of those belief systems, those operating systems that are running there.
yeah, and I think like I know for me, we sought out before we got married a premarital counselor,
Mhm.
and it was recommended by someone in my church. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense. You're about to join everything with this person.
Mhm.
Some of the tools that I learned through counseling, I was able to actually help, like, provide those same tools to other people that were going through like
Mhm.
more serious things. You know what I mean? Like, I've had people close to me that were struggling really bad with anxiety and depression. Like, I can't get out of bed. I'm
Yeah.
scared to leave my house, sort of thing. And I kind of remember some of the tips that the therapist was telling us. And I'm like, oh, I didn't need it or use it in that moment, but I now remember these tools that she told me and I'm able to share that and help someone else. And when I have kids, I want to know these tools. Like
Yeah.
when I heard about the attachments, I was like so intrigued. I'm like, I want to learn this because you never know what kind of kid you're gonna have,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't mean that just because you're one way, they're gonna come out just like you. So now I need to learn what, and I don't want also want to like without realizing it, continue the same patterns and pass down that same trauma.
Yeah.
So I think that in itself is helpful to meet with someone and just kind of learn,
Mhm.
and apply that personally to your life.
Yeah, a lot of that old stuff comes up when we become parents. So I definitely
Yeah.
recommend that as well.
And then if you have boundaries with people that are in your family, I'm just kind of thinking this through, and then now you have a kid, I think that can muddy the waters because let's say your kid is now getting attached to the person that you have the boundary with, they have to navigate that
Yeah.
because you could have created a boundary with your parents, that's grandma or grandpa to the kid.
Mhm.
How do you navigate now not like letting them have a healthy relationship with their grandparent, but then
Yeah.
still honoring the boundary that you made? I feel like that can be difficult and
Yeah.
another reason to continue to seek a therapist. So if anyone is struggling today with any of the things that we talked about, so anxiety, people pleasing, or boundaries, what is a message that you would want, I guess, to leave them with?
Yeah, I think just that there is another way. You don't have to be stuck where you are. And I think that's a feeling that a lot of people have is like, all right, this doesn't feel good, but how do I get out of it? How do I change it? And that there are a lot of techniques, a lot of people out there who can assist with that. So you're just takes bravery to reach out and take that first step, but you'll be glad that you did.
Yeah, yeah. And then, so curious minds want to know. I told some people I was going to have you on, and I guess this has crossed my mind too. But as a therapist, how do you deal with, you know, maybe hearing all this information from other people? I'm sure you've probably heard a ton of traumatic childhoods and things that
Mhm.
have happened to people. How do you not let that affect you? I feel like if I were to hear something, I would just be thinking about that all day. Like, wow, I can't believe that person went through that. And
Mhm.
it would probably affect my mood. How do you deal with that
Yeah,
personally?
I think just the longer you do this work, the more you just kinda learn how to almost detach from it after the fact, right? Like, when I'm with a client, I'm with them. Like, I am in it with them. I feel it. Have that empathy and compassion going, but when I end my workday, that's it. It's sort of, like, locked up there. So, I think that's just something that comes with experience and practice, over time of being a therapist. One boundary I've had to set for myself is I used to work with kids and teens. And now that I've become a parent, I can't work with kids anymore because hearing their stories now as a parent affects me so much deeper than it did before became
Mm,
a parent for some reason. So that's a boundary I've recognized for myself and have had to maintain that, like, I just can't work with kids anymore.
yeah, yeah, interesting. Well, thank you so much for joining me. Can you please share your resources and your social media handles so that anyone watching can connect with you?
Yeah. So my therapy website is catharticspacecounseling.com. Like I said, my book is called Unpacked. You can find that on Amazon. I do have a YouTube channel with a lot of helpful resources based on a lot of what we talked about today. So that handle is The Anxiety Therapist. And then most of my social handles are kristen.jacobson.lcpc.
Okay, and real quick, because I don't think we touched on it, what is the book about?
So it's about how we develop these beliefs and sort of behaviors in childhood and how we bring them into adulthood, and that can become self-sabotaging. So talk a lot about people pleasing, talk a lot about like imposter syndrome, lots of different things, to different operating systems that, were established in childhood and, we continue to use today, but now they're kind of doing more then good.
So that'll help people based on the title unpack. Like, because I feel like that was, and I think I asked you this the last time I interviewed you, but how does someone realize what they're struggling with in childhood, right? Because we're just in the motion, especially as a high level
Mhm.
entrepreneur, business owner, which is my kind of realm and network of people that I connect with. You almost don't have time to realize it, or maybe you're just going through the motions, you don't realize it. So, how do you sit down with yourself and say, how do I find the issues that I have that I don't even know I have? Do you
Yeah.
feel like the book answers some of that?
Yeah, it's definitely, and there are a whole bunch of, like, exercises in there that help facilitate that process.
Mhm.
But then there are also it's those blind spots I was talking about that, like, sometimes you alone can't identify that. You need somebody else to sort of track those patterns and figure it out with you.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha. Well, Kristen, thank you again so much for
Thank
joining me. You're welcome anytime. I'll have all her stuff linked here and tagged on YouTube. Yeah, thank you so much for joining me. And you guys, I will see you on the next episode.